What's going on, everybody? You've got the card board coach here with your boy, Coach Co. And team, we've got a very special guest on the podcast here today. He is focused, both visually and mentally. So we've got Dave from Signed and Slabbed. How are you doing today, man?
Pretty good. How are you, Brendan?
I am a little under the weather, but we're fighting. I had to do an emergency podcast with you. We've been talking about this for a while, and it's just continued to get worse and worse this weekend, I think. And so, ironically enough, a lot of the stuff that we're going to be talking about, it's both recent and yet deeply rooted in this hobby. And so that's one of the reasons why we wanted to have this conversation as talking about recent news, but also how this pertains to the health of this hobby, how this pertains to actions that have been taking place in this hobby for a while now. One of the first topics we're going to be covering is the bounties. And now one of the reasons why we're going to be covering this topic is because recently the Babe Ruth Superfractor Retrofractor 1/1 out of 2023 Bowman Chrome was hit literally this morning. We're recording on a Sunday. By a smaller breaker. So for anyone who thought that, these breakers that are in Fanatics pockets they have loaded boxes.
We have at least one example of the conspiracy theory not working.
That's correct.
Now,
yes,
whether or not that would be enough to make that stop permanently, I don't know, but
that's
we
true.
do have an example.
Well, I mean, it would make sense that they hit it on the app, though, right? Because even yesterday, Fanatics offered a $15,000 bounty on top of the $200,000 bounty that was already present by David Adams.
Yeah.
If someone were to hit it on the Fanatics Live website, right? So Tops also had their RIP day yesterday. So it was like there was all this incentive for everyone to go nuts on Bowman Chrome. That Superfractor was still out in the wild, and there were 2 active bounties on it. And that's why I'm like, if they were giving loaded boxes away, they wouldn't be giving it to a guy with like a YouTube channel who was like, the fact that it broke at like 2 a.m., like we don't even know like how soon after like everyone got that information out, people would want to advertise it right away.
Yeah, I mean, good for them. Hopefully they're able to sort of capitalize on that and maybe be able to move things along. We'll see, but good for them.
I hope so too. One of the things you and I were talking about, though, before we jumped on, was the fact that if we take a step back here and we ask ourselves, why does this card have a $200,000 bounty on it? This is a Babe Ruth card that it's not like it's the only Babe Ruth 1/1 in existence, because they've printed a few of these now. I think a few through Prism have been printed.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And there's a national 1/1 as well, if I'm not mistaken, from like 2016.
I think that's right.
Now, some could argue that this is their the first Bowman first prospect card, but I mean, it really doesn't have a ton of relevance because this is 100 years later. And if you were actually going to line that $200,000 price tag up without even adding that extra 15 on top, because that at one point was the bounty, you would have to get over a PSA 7, and this is something that you pointed out, was over a PSA 7 33 Gaudy. And that's probably Babe Ruth's most popular card, most recognizable card, the card that most people desire when they're looking for a Babe Ruth card. You would have to get over a PSA 7 in order to hit that price tag.
We looked them up, and because we were like, what's the most recognizable Ruth? And he has 4 cards in the 33 Gaudy set. Kind of 3 different colors, like a red, a green, and a yellow. They're like portraits. And then there's the multicolor where he has a bat sort of standing at the plate. And so we went and looked because we're like, okay, let's check this out. And PSA 7s of those cards, most of them are selling anywhere from maybe $80,000 to $100,000, maybe a little bit more right now. And so you've got to move from a 7 to an 8 to get to $200,000 level. And then the other ones that I looked at, and because we talked about this a little, was like, what were some of his other cards? And so he's got like a 1914 Baltimore News. That's really a very, very rare card. And you know, it would command a price like that. Then he's got like E135s and E121s. These are like your caramel series sort of rookie cards. But again, on those, I mean, just like a one or a two is not going to be at that sort of price level.
Yeah.
And those cards are still very, very rare. They're over 100 years old. And so yeah, I think what it sort of demonstrates to me is the idea that this one of one concept, particularly what's being advertised as a first ever one of one in this product, that marketing ploy is at some level working to move product. Because I don't think at any level, I think if that, and listen, we may find out, Brendan, right? Because as and when the bounty is paid to get this thing, I think there's no chance that it sells for anything near $200,000 if it came to open auction.
Well, this all started because of the triple logo man. This all started because of Panini's triple logo man. They made a LeBron card that in, you know, like in 2022, that was the first of its kind, right?
Yeah.
Like,
yes,
first of its kind. It's an
because we
ultra
said it,
modern
this is sort of
card.
these first concepts that where they're.
But like, how many
sort
logo
of,
man does LeBron James have, right? But it was like the first time there was one of like,
there was three of them.
There's three of them. It was his LA jersey, it was his Cleveland jersey, and it was his Miami Heat jersey. And because this is the only one of this one, there might be a few other ones that are like similar, but it's the only one of this one. And that's why all these products should sell for crazy amounts of money, right? And then now we're starting to, I mean, especially with Fanatics coming in and having marketing being their biggest, you know, one of the things that Michael Rubin said before jumping into this hobby, or when he initially purchased Fanatics, was that this hobby has done so great without any marketing. And that was going to change because, I mean, obviously the people that he knows and the exposure that he has and the different connections that he has and the money and the money that he has, right?
Yeah, but the fundamental question becomes is a bounty really marketing? It may be a marketing expense, but I don't know about you. I'm not only not confident, I'm skeptical that that sort of scheme is bringing anyone new into the hobby. Because it's a lottery ticket.
Well, like, what happens when the bounties stop? Or like, does the money printer like does the money printer just have enough money to keep offering up bounties? Like,
and that's something I think we could get into because it was something that I looked at.
right?
So,
like,
you know what? Yeah, one of the questions that we think is out there is who is authentically underwriting all of this? Meaning, you know, do we know for a fact, for instance, that Blowout's $200,000 bounty isn't underwritten in some way by Tops? I mean, as we don't know this, and so
no, of course not. You're right.
Without any evidence,
You're right.
we have to assume
that
it is just coming from them. But I think it's a fair question to ask: is there some other sort of incentive program that may exist specifically for Blowout from Tops that would allow them to maybe pull some of that back later? I don't know. But
well, they've definitely acknowledged that bounty's out there, right? And they've promoted with it several times, right?
Yes. So
I mean,
you know, look, when you break down the math of it, you know, 200 these cases are selling for about 3,500 a case, so a little less than $300 a box. There's 12 boxes in a case.
Yeah.
So just for simple math, if we assume that the sellers of these, you know, direct from Tops are making 50% margin, which would be a lot, right? At a 50% margin, Blowout's got to sell 114 cases, nearly 1,400 boxes at that price just to pay for that card.
I don't think it's a lot.
Well, I don't think it's a ton, but I also think that 50% is probably not the right cost.
No, you're
here,
right.
right?
But like,
So
how
it's
many
really more
cases
than
do we
that.
think that they're actually selling?
Yeah, like I mean, Brendan, if that's approaching say 200 cases, how many is that of the allocation that Blowout gets, and like how many cases are out there? And again, that's a question where, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, but I think there are a lot of collectors out there that are interested in what these print runs really are. How much of this product really exists, because you have to try to re-engineer it based on what you can tell from like the pack odds on the back, which feels like a kind of sneaky way to kind of, it feels to me like somebody talked to a lawyer and is like, what's the most indirect way that we could indicate
to tell you how many packs
we've made? And they're like, oh, well, just put some weird stuff on the back, and like where you gotta have a magnifying glass to even read it.
And then a PhD in math in order to decipher.
You put a checklist out there somewhere that's not even on your site, and like, you know, some dork will sit down and calculate it, but no one's really going to look at it or care. And so to me, it's what I believe it's actually evidence of is for sure how much money some of these places are making and some of the financial incentive that they have to try to push things this way. But I think most people are going to agree bounties are really a temporary sort of short-term push. And, you know, as Seablaz said today, now that the big card is out of there, and I think,
but it's not even that it's not even over though, because
no, because
we can touch
we'll probably transition right into this. As the superfractors start getting picked off, I think you're going to see a total collapse in the price of those boxes. So in a weird way, I'm not sure the bounty worked, because that product has barely been out, a little over a week?
Home and Chrome?
I think, right? 2 weeks?
I think a little bit longer than that, at least a month, I think.
No, because they hit those Duke 1-of-1s on like the first or second day.
Like 2 weeks ago, at least.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. So I mean,
that's not a very long time to open.
No, I know. So what Dave is referring to, and if you guys haven't checked this out, I would highly recommend. I mean, we'll give you a synopsis right now, but there are tons of videos on these. But there were as many as 7 duplicate 1-of-1 superfractors that have been surfaced online. And there were a plethora of different scenarios in which someone had just pulled one, and one of them was on eBay. And we're actually going to touch on one of those stories as well, because it's honestly not kind of fucked up. It is fucked up. And we're going to talk a little bit about etiquette in a situation like that. But so finally, after, let's say 2 weeks of these things surfacing, 1 day, 2 days in between, 7 of them surface, Topps puts out a press release on Friday night, stating that they're acknowledging that there are duplicate 1-of-1s. There are as many as 95 duplicate 1-of-1s, and that they have offered a superfractor buyback program on their website. And you can touch upon the fact that it's not very visible because you tried to look for it, but there are superfractors that they're willing to buy back at crazy costs, including an Ethan Salas, which is apparently the top prospect in this class. The price tag for that buyback is $75,000. And Bill and I were talking about this. You know, I can't remember the last time a catcher card sold for $75,000. Much less a prospect bought back their 1-of-2 superfractor for $75,000. There was a few things wrong with this superfractor. Yeah, I know.
It's not 2. It's definitely only 1.
Yeah. There are a few things wrong with this buyback program. The first is the fact that basically what happens is the first person to claim their prize, and we're gonna lump this into the bounties, because the first person who claims their prize gets the 3,000 or the 5,000 or the 11,000 or the $75,000, and the other person is left with the card. Now, the question to you is, if Topps just paid $75,000 to get this card off the streets, what does that make that other card worth?
Yeah, and I think we've seen some indication, right? So the bounties overall range from 3,000 to 75,000.
Yeah.
And I did a little bit of math on this. As of when I did this morning, 4 had been claimed, so there were still 91 out there available for a total of $687,500, which puts your average at around $7,200 a card. Now, those 4, I was able to actually track the sale of them on eBay, or 3 of the 4, and they ranged anywhere from just under $300 up to like $1,800. So there are definitely instances where the buyback program is at 10x of what the market was assuming the price of the card to be based on open auction, just over a week ago or a week and a half ago. And so, one of the things that I was going to say here is like, and I don't like really always giving people advice, but this is some advice I think you absolutely should take to the bank. If you have one of these cards, you need to be running online as fast as you can to get that thing in there and claimed.
Submitted.
Because will there be instances later on where one of these guys is actually worth more than the 3,000 or the 5,000? See, Brendan, I think that on 95 guys, the chances that one of them at least is going to happen.
Probably,
but
one of them. But
it's what I said to Jeremy Lee. Good luck picking who that is. So, I think you need to run to the bank and get your money, because these cards will never be worth that much. But it raises the question and the issue that you alluded to, which was we've now pit collectors against each other in a race to go get these funds. And so
in a race to get rid of their card, though. Like it's literally a race to get rid of it.
Whoever hits the other one, like, will they be in a better position? Because I guess that'll be the only one. Sure, but again, before we even knew that this had happened, those things weren't worth. Most of them weren't worth that much in the first place. Now, Topps did this on purpose, I'm sure, because they need enough financial incentive for people to really get it done. But and again, if you think about it, though, Topps is sort of on the hook, assuming everyone sends it in, for $700,000. And like, guys, I understand that when you put that in the Fanatics concept, that's not really a lot of money. But I think when you put it in the concept of how much money they actually make on some of these different products, like, that's a substantial piece of what would have otherwise been profit. But
especially because they have autographs, right? There are athletes signing autographs, and anytime you have athletes signing autographs, it costs money, right? Like that. It's not just the printing process.
We had seen some videos of guys who did that, and they were like getting paid anywhere from $2 to $5 an autograph. But the point
adds to, I mean, how many base autographs are now? I mean, if print runs are up exponentially, then you got to assume that base autographs as well follow that, right? Because they have to have a certain number of like base autographs in the entirety of the product, right? So even at $2 per, they're still cutting into your. I mean,
but
5
again,
autographs per
remains,
box.
like, if you've hit this thing, if you've got any of these, you need to be rushing to the internet and rushing to the post office and send that thing in as fast as you can to make sure you get your check.
Well,
which we have a good example.
Yes, yes,
to
we do.
discuss
Yes, I
of
mean,
where that happened.
you were just mentioning the post office. Well, turns out a gentleman on eBay sold the Rainier Arias Superfractor. He is a San Francisco Giants prospect. I'm fairly certain I got all of that right. He sold it. It was originally on auction. Starting price was $14.99, I believe. Guy reached out to him, said, you know, what are you looking for this card? And he said he will be willing to take $2,000. So if you go on 130 point, you're able to see the comp for $2,000. The guy accepted the offer. Funds were transferred. Guy shipped the card, tracked, obviously. Now that card had to go through eBay authentication, so it was on its way there. Then this happened on the 28th, I believe. So September 28th, I think this was the Thursday.
And to be clear, everyone, this is the story that's been told. We
That's
don't.
correct. That's correct.
As it
And one
continues to
version of
develop,
this.
we
Yes.
can't.
Yes.
The only thing that we believe we can substantiate is that there is evidence at eBay that this card had an offer accepted.
That's correct.
It appears in the sold
and
listing.
there's tracking number, and then it was intercepted.
Yeah.
It was actually intercepted, and there's a visual of this card being intercepted after the $25,000 bounty was announced. So this card personally had a $25,000 bounty. It's assumed that the seller, the original seller of this card, realized that there was a $25,000 bounty on it a day later after shipping it, intercepted the package, and has seemingly gone dark towards the new buyer, let's call him, or she or he or them.
To the rightful owner, assuming
That's correct.
He did actually pay for it.
Well, it's paid for. I mean, it's registered in the system. It's, you know what I mean? Like
all appearances are that this had been paid for.
That's correct. That's correct. And so, you know, there was a lot of people talking about the fact that they would do something like this. And it really got you and I heated. You were kind of riled up already. Like, that was like my last straw, truthfully, because you had a deal. The deal was you're selling this card for $2,000. That's what you agreed to, regardless of what the price is tomorrow. You know, you had a deal in place. If you were making this deal at a card show and you sold this to somebody and they walked out of that card show with the card, the price tomorrow doesn't fucking matter.
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't fucking matter what that price is tomorrow. Even if you had the opportunity to steal it back from that guy's car tomorrow at 12 times, are you telling me that you fuckers would go do that? That's crazy.
There are people who are saying they would.
Because that's what you're doing, right? You're committing mail fraud. You ripped someone. That package was not addressed to you, okay? And you intercepted it. And now, assuming that this is exactly what happened, okay? But we are speaking under the pretenses that it did, and based on the response of other people saying that, yeah, of course. Oh, if I sold a $2,000 card for $25,000 and it was actually $25,000 the next day, yeah, I would do the same thing.
There's more than an insignificant portion of the hobby who thinks that canceling this sale is perfectly fine. And the reason I'm
after
laughing
you ship it. After you ship it.
I'm laughing about it because I don't want to cry over how unethical even suggesting this is. So, but again, it's indicative of what some of these types of financial incentives will do. I think it's not a debate any longer that this has pit people against each other. And I suspect on this one that this isn't just gonna go away, because we're talking about a more than $20,000 potential value of the item based on a price that Topps has published publicly on the internet. Now, what to me is even more fascinating, though, is can someone hit the other one
I know.
before this
Oh,
little
then
deal unwinds.
there'd be a whole triangle. Well, I wonder
So
what's going to happen,
so
right? I mean, because there was
anyway,
enough buzz that, like, I mean, you got to assume that someone either, I mean, hope that someone at either eBay or Tops gets wind of this story, and like once it gets submitted, it's kind of like, all right, like talk to me about what happened here. You know what I mean? Like, and I don't know what the solution is because
yeah,
I'm sure it's like he said, she said, but at the end of the day, I mean, there's some pretty cold hard facts, and like if you sold this card, that's it. This card is sold.
right.
Okay, period. Card is sold.
Yeah,
Doesn't matter how much it went. It doesn't matter if it went up to $1 million tomorrow. Okay, I mean, obviously that's a big stretch, but still, I mean, at the end of the day, you agreed to sell your card at this price, and regardless of what the price becomes tomorrow, regardless if you somehow have access to it and you shouldn't the next day, like is that what we're saying? That like if I have access to it the next day, then like meh, not no, I'm cool now. It's mine.
hey bro, trades these backsies. Here's your 2 grand.
You know, and that's just one
Yeah,
instance.
it's
I
one
will say
instance. So
before we come off this topic, I think that the best way, I think that Topps should have advertised that there was $700,000 in buybacks, but I don't think they should have posted the individual, like the number for each individual card. I think that the minute you give people like a specific number, like then they think that they have that number, because otherwise it's
right,
like a crapshoot, right? It's like,
right,
I wonder what you get, right?
right.
Chances are, if that guy, and like we didn't know what the bounties were, and you say like they range from $2,000 to 75,000
Three
bucks,
thousand is the
okay.
lowest.
So if you say that
Overwhelming
they,
majority of them are 3 to 5.
chances are that guy's not stealing back that package for an extra $1,000 still,
Right,
right? Like,
right.
so I think that, and in fairness, I mean, this was their damage control. This was their attempt to show everyone that they're
But
for the
but
hobby,
it
and
clearly, Brendan, it wasn't that well thought out. And so, like, one thing I did want to read real quickly, because
yeah,
and I'm going to pick on these guys because I know that they can take it, but
go for it.
they weren't the only ones that posted something like this. So these, a lot of the other talking heads in the hobby when this happened, put out these flowery way to go Tops things, even though they didn't want to. They won't say anything particularly critical of them for having this occur in the first place,
Yes,
which is really a completely other topic of conversation. But the guys at Sports Card Nonsense put it out, and they said, obviously a bad situation, but I'm happy it's being addressed directly, and seems like the owners will be compensated. Curious to hear the exact details about that, but it's a good start. And I commented in their thread, and they liked it, although they may just like everything. I said this was going to pit collectors against each other, and that was the main reason that I didn't like it, because it creates this rush to the bank in a sense. And so, what about the person that hits the other one? What sort of where's their compensation in all this? Because and we're drawing the conclusion that,
but what
oh,
if they
it's
don't?
well them owning the card.
Yes,
And
yes,
so we've entered this weird like time
I
frame
yeah,
of where and people I think are missing that in terms of again how these sorts of buyback things work.
yes,
They give off this appearance of the value of getting it as fast as you can, right? Not understanding that again, Brendan, we had evidence of cards that sold before this that were subject to it selling at 1/10 of what the ultimate bounty price
yeah.
was. So what do you think the new ones are going to be? Well, the point being, these bounties aren't setting any sort of realistic market.
Well, because who's gonna pay that price? Like
Not later. No one is
no
going to
one's
pay
paying
it.
that price, right? Like, and it's
And
you can't use that as a
also just
comp.
the
Like,
fear of like, you know, are these things, I mean, it's top, hopefully Tops will do some sort of video
I
or something
I
showing
agree
these
with you.
things
I
like
agree with
in a
you.
bonfire,
I
right?
agree with you because like at the end of the day, you can't unsee the fact that there's two of them, right?
Right.
Like
And
you know
speaking
that
of
there's
why we
two.
would want them to do that,
Yeah, yeah,
as we've discussed,
yeah,
if you go onto the Tops website to try to locate this bounty program, it to me appears impossible to find. I've done because it's not on the front page of the Tops.com site. It's buried behind a Tops.com/pages/ Bowman buyback. So you can find it if you
Yeah.
Google. Now, as far as we can tell, they had done sort of this press release, and they did do the Instagram story post that issued the statement and had the link.
And
But stories,
and the tweet as well.
yeah, and so but
Yeah.
stories roll off of Instagram in 24 hours. When you go to their Instagram page, there's no post about it.
Yeah.
So
The only
in a
permanent
sense,
post is the one on Twitter or
on
X
Twitter.
or
Okay,
whatever the hell you want
so
to
in a
call it.
sense,
Yeah.
you know, yes, Tops addressed it, but then in light of Rip Night coming up, they kind of ripped it out of the public's view. And so if you didn't kind of catch on to it quickly, if you're not on Twitter and you're not at a card show with people talking about it, and again, I would argue that there's a significant portion of the hobby that's involved in this stuff that
Yeah. Oh,
doesn't
of
read
course.
that sort of news.
Yeah.
I
Of
think there's
course.
still a bunch of people who don't even know about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So again, if they really
Yeah.
dealt with it, I mean, not in my opinion, in a public enough fashion to really address it. And so there's multiple issues in my mind of how this was handled. And you know, all we can hope is that we don't land in a situation like this again.
I was just about to say, I'm like, unfortunately, you only have one shot at like getting this right,
Right.
because I really hope this doesn't happen again. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, because like the next
Yeah.
time, like it's like a legit problem, and like now you're losing, like then you
Yeah.
know you're selling product. Like now you know that this is like just putting out 95 bounties is a great way to, and I'm sure it was a great way when it was announced.
Yeah.
To sell a ton of product,
Yeah.
ton of product ahead of Rip Night, you know, a ton of product ahead of. They had an early morning chase on Saturday morning for the Babe Ruth Superfractor
Yeah.
on their Fanatics Live site. They even paid for advertising on a popular Instagram page called Wasted.
Right.
It was 10 million followers and various different subject matters. But I was like, what the hell are sports cards doing here? And I was like,
yeah.
So there was definitely ample incentive to, you know, sell boxes this weekend.
Right.
And conveniently enough, the Babe Ruth was pulled. I mean, they don't have to pay that out to our knowledge. So it's a win-win for them right now. What I do want to talk about, and it's on the same side as like the integrity thing, and it was another instance where you and I were shaking our heads and being like, what the fuck is going on right now? There was an incident where Shyway Vlogs, there was a Reddit post about him shilling his cards and buying them back. Okay. Right? Let's winning some of them. So I guess shilling them enough to win and then buying them back. Okay. And I put buying it back in quotations because that's how some people framed this, as just buying your cards back. Okay. Now there was a lot of people. First of all, I think it was like Mustard. His name was Mustard Cards, the one that broke this.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And what they did was they found on eBay that the same seller that was buying these cards, that was bidding on these cards, and they tracked that seller and some of their purchases, and they ended up seeing that seller was posting on Instagram, and it happened to be him. And I mean, it's fantastic investigative journalism. But I digress. So the big issue here was obviously the shill, the fact that you were bidding up cards. And I should also mention that he sent these cards to a consignor, and that consignor sold through eBay. So he was privately bidding up the cards that he had sent to a consignor. Now, his justification in doing so was that the cards were too low based on his own perceived value of the cards, and that for those prices, he would just buy them back. Despite initially saying that he had gone through tough, like rough financial times and needed the money, you know, maybe obviously not enough to sell them at 50% comps or whatever the comp is. You were very adamant in making sure that people were well aware that shilling of any kind is unacceptable. Okay, you can't say you're going to sell something, and this is the second time we're talking about this now. Second instance where you said you're going to sell something, and you said, actually, you know what? Price has changed. I'm taking it back. Right? Both of those scenarios, they're both different scenarios, obviously. Right? But
yeah,
once something is for sale at auction, it is no longer yours. It's gone. It's to whoever wins it. Right?
It should be gone.
Well, it should be to someone else. You've sold it. It's gone. It's gone to someone else.
You've agreed to let it go.
Yes.
And I'm not aware of any consignment house or auction house that in their standard terms and conditions say it's fine if you want to bid on your own submitted items to the auction. If someone can find me that somewhere, let me know. I don't believe they exist. I don't believe they exist, because if any auction house had that, they'd pretty much be out of business.
100%.
So, look, yeah, I've made a big deal out of this in particular, because I think it's something that is absolutely widespread in the hobby. We're all aware that this goes on. I think that sometimes we've convinced ourselves that there's actually more of it than there realistically is. My honest belief is that there are not a ton of people out there, for instance, shill bidding 1996 Topps Kobe Bryant PSA 7s, right? There are certain types of cards, and there are certain types of unethical individuals where this activity is pretty concentrated. But it was interesting, Brendan, because again, we still have what I would call more than an insignificant component of the hobby that thinks this is okay. Like, I saw a couple of guys that did put some polls on their Instagram that were coming back at 10 to 15%, sometimes a little higher, thinking that this activity was okay.
And to be fair, they were framing it as buying your cards back.
Yeah, they're framing it as buying your card back. It's not buying your card back. It's paying a consignment fee not to sell your card, or what some people might call a dumbass tax. To borrow a phrase from who is one of my favorite guys, Red Foreman from the 70s show, it's a dumbass tax. Now, it's completely unethical to do this. There should be no question about that. And I've said, if you don't agree with me, please let me know so that you can raise your hand in front of the hobby and let everyone know that you are a cheat. Because that's what happened. People got cheated. They got cheated of dollars, and they got cheated of cards.
Yep.
And so it's
like,
absolutely
even
wrong.
if it's 50% of what you think the value is, first of all,
and so
the market pays what the market pays for it, right? So
that was
regardless
of
what you think,
heard is like,
regardless of what you think this card is worth, I could think this card is worth $600. If you think it's worth $600, put it best offer OBO and let someone pay $600. Leave it up there. Leave it up there for 6 months. Leave it up there for a year until someone buys it, right? Like,
the quote that it surfaced was, quote, "So buying cards at half off is shilling." And the answer to that question is no, it's not shilling. Bidding on your own cards is shilling. That's why there's a word for it. And shilling is unethical. It violates every auction house's policies. And I'm not interested in the
it's not illegal.
part-time legal
it's not illegal.
Whether it's illegal here or there or wherever, it's wrong. And yes, do I understand that it happens a lot in the hobby? Of course I do. And one of the reasons this happens is the consignment shops, for the most part, don't really have the available tools that they need. This is particularly true at eBay.
Yeah.
From my understanding, the people I've talked to that own consignment shops, they don't really have the ability to block certain bidders from a component of the listings the way that some of the other auction houses do. So like I do a lot of business like at Golden, at Heritage, at PWCC, at Robert Edwards Auctions. All those places have the technology built into their system to know when I've submitted something for auction that that prohibits me from bidding on it. And I've tested it before because I started wondering, like, you know, does it really recognize me? And all of them do in their own way. And so to me, it's sort of curious that these companies can do that, but the biggest auction platform in the world can't give their consignment guys the ability to do that. So like that, does that make sense? So the technology doesn't.
Yeah, because I was gonna say that like that transaction doesn't take place through eBay, right? Like the me giving you my cards to sell doesn't go through eBay. So there wouldn't be a paper trail through eBay to be like, oh, you've gifted unless it was maybe from like an eBay vault. You know what I mean? Like I can see how they could do that. Like
maybe
if I'm transferring my stuff to your vault and then like you can sell it from my vault, you know what I mean? Like then it'd be a little bit easier to trace that lineage and be like, okay, this came from this vault and there wasn't a dollar value attached to it. Then that means that this person is selling it. You know what I mean? Like, so
but
I agree with you, but at the end of the day, the technology is not there. That's what you're saying.
We got to, the technology exists.
Yeah. Well, not at eBay.
eBay's, well, it still exists. eBay's just chosen not to implement it. Okay. And so where the conversation then sort of runs is, well, people could just have another account. And to which I've countered every time, well, we've heard that forever. You just go sign up another account. Well, if all of these auction houses at some level or another would implement some level of identity verification, which we know is technology that exists in the rest of the world.
Of course.
If they would implement that, that absolutely would cut it down. You and I couldn't just go out there and all of a sudden have a different name, but like the same address and same social or
same bank accounts, you know what I mean?
Yeah, like there are ways to it essentially would require that shilling process to become a lot more sophisticated than it has to be now. And just by very fact of it requiring that actually cuts down the activity to a great degree, in my opinion. But again, the conversation always focuses on, well, it's all the ideas of how people would get around any sort of roadblock we put in. And it ultimately ends with, well, gosh, because I can't think of all that stuff, then I just won't do anything. Right. So, and I think that that's a problem. And again, my hope is that, collectively, we've all got to complain about it enough in an effort to help some of these consignment shops, because believe me, like the guys at Quick Consign, which was the consigner where this happened to, that they're not happy about it.
Yeah.
Right. I talk to them and I know they're not happy that this happens, because there's an indirect spill out onto them for something that realistically, again, they're not given the sorts of tools and or other things to be able to try and control it. And so, that's something that I think needs a lot more investment from the hobby that's beneficial outside of just the sports cards world. It's any sort of auction environment, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, what we've also heard is, we have a nearly unending stream of people that are saying, well, I know people who do it. So some folks are using that as sort of the justification of why maybe this was sort of okay. And this is like the steroids era in baseball. It's like, well, if everybody else is shooting up, I guess I should too. Even though you're just cheating everyone by doing that. And so, my question then becomes, like, at what point are people going to get sick enough of it to start putting the names out there and putting the accusations out there, right? Or is it just subject to this type of?
But what if it's all just work? What if it's all just a house of cards, though, right? Like,
well, and again, that's the fear. That's the fear that exists. And my counter to that is like, Brendan, there's been a hobby forever.
No, so for sure.
We're drunk still from 2021.
Yeah, probably, yeah.
Hoping that everything can go back there because it was just easy flowing money. And the fact is, these things had all kind of existed before that. They still exist now. everything we look at tells us, or I think pretty well indicates why the run up had happened, because it wasn't just exclusive to this hobby. It was out there for everything.
Across
People
the
were
board.
stuck at home,
Yeah.
they were bored,
Yeah.
and a lot of them were getting free money
Yeah.
from the government that they wanted to spend it on something that made them feel better. And this, along with several other places, became the location for those types of
Well, there was
funds.
also just a massive nostalgia push. Like even if you look at the
Hundred
types of
percent,
if you look at the
100%.
types of movies that have come out in the last like 2, 3, 4 years, like
Yeah,
you're seeing
yeah.
like all remakes, Little
Top
Mermaid,
Gun.
Beasties, like you know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
all
yeah,
like they're all old nostalgic remakes, right? Like
yeah,
that's kind of like Barbie, like all things that like resonated with a certain type of person 20 or 30 years ago, right? So
yeah, yeah.
it's
That's
there was
fair.
a whole nostalgic push. You're right. People were at home. They were spending money that truthfully wasn't theirs, and is slowly getting clawed back. but yeah, it's just I don't know. I think that the fear of a lot of people is probably like this is just a house of cards potentially, and like once all these things start actually becoming implemented, like what is a PSA 10 Luca actually worth? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like what is a
Any Trey Young actually worth.
yeah, like what is I mean, I know Ronald
But
Acuna
here's
had a
the thing,
massive
Brendan.
season, but
Here's the thing, Brendan. I think that ultimate truth in pricing and truth in the auctions will actually has the opposite effect of what people think. Because I believe it actually spurs additional commerce because the confidence level goes up.
yeah.
I think we still have quite a bit of restricted commerce in our space, partly because people are unwilling to take losses. That's obviously a big part of it.
Crazy.
But there are a lot of people that we see this in a lot of the polls. They don't necessarily bid at some of these other auction houses because they're not confident in the knowledge that they're not necessarily getting shilled. There are people that I know on eBay that won't bid with some of the consignment shops at all for that very reason. And again, in my mind, that's limiting commerce
I
that
can think
otherwise
of
would
I think of
occur
one I won't go
if
near.
right if your confidence level was higher. And so that's why I think there needs to be a big push around it, because the more confident people are in the comps that they're seeing and knowing that they are really real, and it doesn't matter whether it went to a collector or a flipper or an investor. The point being just that they're confident that it did get paid for, right? Which is why the big push,
So
obviously, at
that
eBay and other
there's
places
a reason why there's
recently
a
to make sure
70%.
it gets paid for,
Yeah,
right?
and there's a huge put. I mean, there's a reason why people buy at 70% comps because like
Yes.
there's just like no, and it's not because like I need room. I think it's truly because like buyer confidence. I think that a lot of
Yeah.
people they just don't feel confident paying
It's
like
confidence,
eBay
and
comps.
it's the combination of
Yeah,
fees too,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like
But I
the
also just don't feel
selling
like,
fees of
but yeah, but think about how many additional fees that don't get logged on that actual
yes,
on that
yes,
right.
yes,
So they
yes,
don't they
yes.
don't they don't account for tax,
Sales
especially
tax,
here,
shipping, all
and
that.
shipping, right? And that like realistically, I should be adding that. So like that number should be even higher, not less. I shouldn't be
Right,
buying at 70% less than that, right?
right,
I think the
right.
70% thing comes from the fact that a lot of people are not confident that the eBay comps are solid, right?
Yeah,
A lot of people are probably like, man, that's yeah, it's
yeah,
sold on eBay for that, but I can't get that here, right?
yeah,
And why is that? Why is it that before Beckett, you could take a Beckett magazine around and sell something at the price for a Beckett magazine relatively easily, right? You didn't have to say, hey, I'm buying at 80 or 70% of the Beckett magazine. You're like, no, this is the price, right? Like,
yeah,
obviously,
yeah.
there's like some negotiation room there, but people were
Right.
pretty like, yeah, I'm cool with paying that price because that's the price. But that
Yeah,
there's not that same level of confidence when it comes to an eBay comp.
right. Well, any comp,
Yeah. Well,
in my
that's
opinion, because
correct.
again,
That's
we
correct.
know for sure
You're right.
in tons of instances that if you just go look at cards that have been auctioned off over and over, I mean, are we confident that when something gets relisted at PWCC, it's because someone's taking an immediate L, or is it really because it didn't get paid for? I'm just using PWCC
No,
as
no,
an
yeah,
example.
of course.
Like
Yeah,
non-pays happen at all the auction
yeah,
houses, right?
yeah,
Um, I'm sure Golden has had them more than likely because again, we'd seen the same card sort of hit in such short time frame that it was indicative that, you know, it was really a non-pay. So
Yeah.
anyway, I mean, look, I think I think we've clearly established that this practice is unethical. It demonstrates a big lack of character. And I'm going to go so far as, to the extent that anyone else out there is trying to defend or rationalize this practice, you know, you are also demonstrating your lack of character by trying to defend it. So like, just don't hear what people are saying,
Yeah.
and stop doing it,
Yeah.
because if you get caught, there are some level of consequences. And I think it's worth spending a few minutes though talking about that, right? Because Brendan, we've seen, I don't know about you, I've seen a couple of other posts and polls that were kind of, you know, sort of feeling sorry for what had happened to him here. And so, you know, one of the things that I felt like was important to point out is, you know, what really were the consequences? Because I had a couple of people that had said, you know, well, he sort of lost his job with Fund Your Cards.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know, that's true.
He did.
Mark made it very
Yes.
clear that he'd cut ties, that he wasn't involved anymore. But guys, I mean, ask yourself the question: why is that not actually the rightful outcome here? You know, he impaired the goodwill and brought questions about standard business practice, you know, that fell over onto his business partner, right? So like, to me, that was sort of a rightful outcome. I mean, put it in a just slightly different situation, because I think we're saying he essentially stole. So I mean,
Yeah.
Brendan, if you were working for another company out there, and you stole something from them, whether it was money or whatever,
Cleaning
right?
supplies,
I mean,
or
as far as we,
like,
well, but again, as far as we know, he hasn't been charged with a theft. Like, if you did that, if you stole money from a company that you worked for,
fair.
you'd absolutely be potentially catching charges of theft and being arrested. Like, that hasn't happened. We haven't kicked him out of the hobby. For what we know to this point, he is elected to leave to take care of some personal issues, and not, like, I applaud him for that. Right? I hope he seeks and gets some of the help that he feels like he needs, because I hope that his friends support him in that.
Yeah.
Right? There's been a lot of conversation about compassion, and again, that I have compassion for the individual, that hopefully he, you know, that he made a mistake and can get the help that he needs. And I think there are people that are close around him that can hopefully help push him to do that. But again, no one's kicked him out. I mean, there's no hobby membership card that we're all
Yeah.
waving around.
Yeah.
There
Yeah.
wasn't
Yeah.
we're not members of the
Yeah.
hobby trading card club at Augusta here. I mean, if he wanted to stick around, none of us can stop him. But
No,
are there people that would decide maybe they don't want to do business with him? Yes,
for
there are.
sure.
And
Yeah.
there should be, right? There absolutely should be. And so, you know, to me, that there's a limit to, I think, or it's maybe the better way to say it, Brendan, is it's awkward to me, the level of sort of feel bad for someone that was cheating other people. And
Yeah.
so I just think it's important that maybe we reframe that a little bit within a compassionate concept too for the individual. But like, what feelings do we have for the people who got cheated out of their money?
Yeah.
Do we have the same
Well,
compassion for them?
and
Because
to clarify what you're saying is that, like, I mean, there were instances where, let's say that card would have gone for $1,200, where that
right,
person ended up having to pay 1,600, right? Like,
yes,
regardless
yes,
of if the individual would have paid it at the end if they won it. I mean, at the end of the day, like, those bids increase the bids, right? Like,
correct.
you can't say that didn't have an impact on the final value of that card, no matter how
That's
many
right.
other bids came in afterwards or whatever.
That's
Like,
right. That's
at the end of the
right.
day,
And so,
you had a hand in the final sale price of that card, right? So
how are those people sort of compensated for what has now happened to them? I'm not sure that there's a clear way. So again, within that concept of the compassion argument, I think it's fine to have compassion for the individual, but we just quickly jump over the anonymous hobby participants that were also harmed and sort of don't really have the same level of compassion for them, which
Yeah.
means that we're back to this idea of escalating individuals and some of their issues over the health of the hobby. And I continue to believe that that's just a dangerous precedent to
Yeah.
continue to set, because it ultimately continues to drive home this idea of me versus you. And I think those types of environments continue to attract people that are willing to rationalize away certain behaviors and activities to the detriment of all of us. And it
Yeah.
and it it just pulls the ethical standard further and further down, and it begins to normalize these types of behaviors. And so it's a tricky balance, but it's why I had been so outspoken about it, because I just don't see enough people covering it. And like someone I can think of, and I told you I was going to do this, right? Cage had him on his program a number of times, had many times kind of reposted things and done a lot in terms of helping to promote his spot in the hobby.
Mm-hmm.
And yet to me personally, there's sort of a deafening silence now that Cage hasn't sort of addressed this in kind of any meaningful way, at least not that I've seen. Right. And that to me again gets back to this influencer concept of if we're going to give people credibility, and certainly this guy had gotten a lot of credibility, and it was part of the Fun Your Cards, and had grown this nice following
He
and
was on a
doing
Topps
all the things.
commercial.
Yeah, yes, was on a Topps
Yeah.
commercial,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not as if he wasn't given an
Yeah.
opportunity to be able to do some things, and yet here we sit, and it's just like silence, right? But
But
where what are these same
$60
people doing in
cards
terms of
and $80
trying to benefit other
cards.
people that are trying to grow their brand or trying to do their thing, right? So
Yeah.
it becomes this weird beauty contest in a sense of like who's either the prettiest or kind of the strangest. And like there's no additional sort of vetting concept, and again there's no responsibility on the back end if you back the wrong horse. And I just think that those, Brendan and I grew up with the concept that like a big way that people are able to kind of define who you are is the company that you keep. And that's how I approach my life, and it's a lot how I also approach the hobby. And I think that that's important, and I hope people will take it to heart and think about it a little bit more. Which not to say don't have compassion, you should,
Mm-hmm.
but there's also a level of consequence that kind of makes sense. And I think I've tried to articulate the best I can. I don't really think this cost him necessarily that much. We'll see. The hobby can be pretty forgiving. And I think several people have
Pretty
sort of laid out the
forgiving.
path for him to
Pretty
walk down if
forgiving.
he wants to come back in.
Mastro was at the National, wasn't he?
Yes. And he was on Probstein and so yeah. Anyway,
Well, let's talk about
that's
what we
it.
can do
I'm
about.
off that soapbox.
Yes, as I said, let's talk about what we can do about all this, though. So, Bill, aka Ephus Pitch, and
Yep.
I don't know who else is involved in creating the initial petition. So, do you want to talk a little bit
Well, I'll include me because
Okay.
I did.
There you go.
There was a small group, maybe. Well, I'll let Bill address that if he wants, but a small group, including me, that saw it before it was put to the masses. But yeah, I think Bill had become frustrated, primarily on the manufacturing side.
Yep.
And so, was looking for a mechanism to try and gather, a broader level of hobby support to, raise some questions and issues that he felt like were important to the broader group of collectors, wanted to use the petition as a mechanism to try to communicate that, in a more formal way to the guys at Topps and Fanatics.
Yep.
And, what we've unfortunately kind of, I think, seen with this effort goes to what, I call hobby rule number one.
Hobby's
But it's
lazy.
the hobby is lazy. But also, as you know, as a personal trainer, otherwise, people in general are just
People,
lazy.
period.
So this isn't hobby
No, it's not a
specific.
hobby specific thing.
It's not hobby specific. It's
No.
it's human specific.
Yeah.
Um,
Are you sure it's not human
but yeah,
specific?
it hasn't seemed to quite resonate or pop yet. And the suggestions that are in there are things like, you know, give the real pack odds, right? Talk about the production runs. Um, commit to certain levels of consistency around products and or what is inserted into it, right? Some of the historical types of cards and series within the hobby and some of the different products. And so, relatively, I think, reasonable. I mean, I signed the petition
Yeah, so do I.
because I saw no reason not to.
Yeah.
But
Well, I mean,
we,
ultimately, what he's asking for is just more transparency, right?
yeah,
And I
yeah,
think we can all do wonders with more transparency, right? Like more transparency gives me more information to be able to make sound decisions, right? Like at the end of the day,
yeah.
it makes it a little bit easier for you to make decisions. You get consumer confidence. You get the confidence from the
Again,
hobby.
the
Right?
idea is
Like,
more information
yeah,
should allow for greater confidence and
that's
greater understanding of what you're doing, which I think Bill and I certainly believe would lead to a greater level and an easier level of commerce,
yes,
which we
yeah,
all are suggesting
yeah,
and are conceptually with
yeah,
fanatics around the idea of more commerce is better for everyone.
yeah,
A bigger pie will allow not only more people to be involved, but more people to build businesses, to hire employees, to expand the types of collecting that they do, et cetera.
yeah,
So that in that concept, knowledge of this stuff is powerful because it should yield a more informed decision.
yeah.
But I, hobby participants seem unable to, or in many instances, unwilling to sort of get behind that. There's 100% a fear of signing on by some of the segments of business owners or influences in the hobby. I believe that 100% because they have a fear that if their name appears on it, there could be repercussions or reprimand taken against them. We've heard that.
Yeah, but we just talked about there being no repercussions for someone shilling. So what repercussions could there be for signing a petition?
Some people think that they could have like their allocations cut because their name appeared on it.
Isn't it
Or,
crazy though? Isn't it crazy that like we're
oh,
talking
I
about
think it's crazy because,
signing a petition and there's worse
I
repercussions
mean,
than there are for actually like shilling a card?
Brendan, I think that at a high level, tops and fanatics they don't really listen to very many of us at all. It's a small group, primarily business owners, breakers, those types. I mean, I'm not speculating on this. We've seen that this is true because like they're not putting out hobby uh, questionnaires
No.
or preferences or anything like that I've seen. And I talked to enough people that even if they didn't include me, which I'd understand if they didn't want to,
Yeah.
people that I know would get it don't get those things. So I don't believe they really listen to you that much, as an until maybe you're critical enough of them. And then I think in a few instances we may have seen that they will spare no time or no effort whatsoever to try to discredit you or to potentially reprimand you in one of these ways, which is sort of awkward. Uh, or if they just don't like you, they just block you. Now, in my world, if someone's blocked you, that means whatever you said, because I try to be at least a little bit reasonable and funny. I know
Yeah.
other people aren't, right?
Yeah.
And that's why they get blocked because
Yeah.
they're unreasonable. But like in instances where I know I've gotten blocked, I think it's mostly because the dart hit near enough to the bullseye that it became
David,
quite uncomfortable.
David, I have no comment on the subject matter, David. I am no contest.
That's fine. I won't tell everybody who did it
That's
to
good.
you then.
That's good. I mean, to be honest, I was like, I had a nice little, I was in Instagram jail this weekend too, though.
Yeah, you were.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you got out, thankfully.
Yeah.
So, no, so again, in my mind, the petition was a mechanism for hobby participants broadly to agree that these were the sorts of issues that were important to us. And then if we could build enough of a voice through that process to then have this kind of formal thing out there, then Fanatics and Tops will have, and even Panini by extension, will have received some information that I think would be useful that they could take in, think about, and decide what's the right outcome from this. And then
and it's
I'm
organized.
sure.
You know what I mean? It's
Yeah,
organized. It's put together. It's not a bunch of people just
like
yelling
again,
at
but
Instagram
and
stories.
Brendan, the point of it too was not to be, it wasn't intended to be in like this combative sort of fashion.
Exactly.
It was meant to be informational to them, and the idea being that if this one would take, then you could do a series of follow-ons with, for instance, eBay or consignment houses, auction houses more broadly, right? You could give input into things about local card shops. We could absolutely sort of address some of the issues that exist in the breaking world and get at some of those platforms. Fanatics Live, obviously coming up, but like Whatnot and Loot that had historically been your big breaking platforms, or your YouTube lives and these sorts of things. Like I think that was really going to, it's a mechanism that potentially gives each of our individual voices a little bit more amplification as a group. But again, the hobby's lazy, and I just think that there's been a big resistance to it, either out of laziness or out of fear that there could be some reprimand, because like if you're doing okay with it and you have those relationships at some level already, your financial incentives to be quiet are really, really high, which is certainly a criticism we've had, obviously, of a lot of the influencers. Like, I don't have sponsors, and so I don't really have to worry about that. Now, my mouth may be preventing me from having some sponsors because I'm willing to be critical, but I'm trying to be reasonably critical and not just like, hey, this was dumb. I try to say, I don't like it. Here's why I don't like it. And to the extent I can give a better solution, I will. And that, I think, is something that could be valuable to all the different businesses across the hobby. But until we decide to collectively, kind of empower our bigger voice, I just don't know why anyone would want to deal with it.
Yeah.
Right. Outside of an outside regulator, if somebody catches something from a state attorney general that decides that this breaking is actually gambling,
or that freaking mail fraud, bro.
Yes. Like, is that really our only mechanism to settle these things? Is somebody has to get in a courtroom and fight it out? Then we're all in sort of big trouble. So it's been concerning that the hobby is becoming less and less recognizable from what it had been for certainly for guys like me and Bill that have been, or they're a little bit older and been around. And that's the challenge we're trying to issue, specifically to even some of these younger guys that are building businesses and whatever, is like, if you want change to happen and you can't get it on your own, there may be a better path. And this one seemed like a pretty low risk one, but and again, man, it was easy. It wasn't that hard to do, Brendan. You had to click a couple buttons through to some websites. So like, if people aren't willing to do that, then they're probably not really willing to do anything.
No, I would agree with you. Dave, I want to thank you so much for jumping on here and helping articulate some pretty important thoughts and ideas, and discussing subject matters that a lot of people might not be willing to discuss, and giving your honest opinion and critical, but always providing solutions. And so I really appreciate you jumping on here with me today. Team, if you haven't already, please go check out the petition. You go to EFIS_pitch Instagram, just click the link in bio and you'll be taken there. I'm not saying you need to sign it. I'm just saying take a look at it. Just see
Check it out. Check it out.
If it's something that resonates with you, and something you might want to get behind in terms of just a little bit more transparency for print runs and stuff of that nature. Team, I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of the Cardboard Coach. If you haven't already, you need to check out Signed and Slabbed on Instagram, on YouTube now. He's been posting regularly on YouTube. I'll connect to you on the YouTube. Don't worry. And yeah, man, reach out to him. Enjoy his content. He's got some great stuff. Team, I hope you enjoy this week's episode. Cardboard Coach and Dave from Signed and Slabbed are out.
Signing out.
Peace.